All right, buckle up, everybody. We're diving deep into Yuval Noah Harari's Sapiens, a brief history of humankind today.
The big one.
You guys sent in a really fascinating mix of chapters and excerpts for this one. Seems like y'all are interested in the big picture stuff, like what makes us humans unique? How did we get to this point?
Right, the really big questions.
Exactly. We're going to be looking at the cognitive revolution, the agricultural revolution, the scientific revolution.
What shifts?
And how those huge shifts shaped empires, religions, and ultimately, like, the world we live in today, you know?
Yeah, how we got to now.
And get this, Harari argues that so many things we just take for granted, things like nations, corporations, they only exist because enough people believe in them. It's this whole idea of imagined realities that plays a huge role in human history.
Definitely.
We'll unpack that together. But first, let's rewind all the way back to the beginning, to the cognitive revolution and the rise of Homo sapiens.
Okay.
What makes this period so important?
Well, the cognitive revolution, it all started around 70,000 years ago. It's when Homo sapiens developed this, like, truly groundbreaking capacity for language and abstract thought.
Yeah.
So imagine the explosion of ideas and possibilities when humans could suddenly communicate complex thoughts.
It's like upgrading from dial-up to broadband for the human brain, basically.
Yeah.
But here's something that blew my mind when I was reading Sapiens to get ready for this. We weren't the only humans around back then. The book points out that for a long time, different human species were all sharing the planet. Neanderthals, for instance. What happened to them? Did Homo sapiens just, like, crowd them out or something?
Well, there are actually a couple of main theories about this.
Okay.
The replacement theory suggests that Homo sapiens were simply more successful, just out-competing other human species for resources.
So they were just better at surviving, basically.
Right. But then there's the interbreeding theory, which has gotten more support from recent genetic discoveries. This theory suggests there was a lot more intermixing between different human groups than we initially thought.
So maybe a little of both, you think?
It's possible.
That's fascinating. Makes you wonder what those early encounters were like. But let's get back to language for a second. You know, it's not just about sharing, like, practical information, right? Like where to find food or warning about danger.
Right.
What were our ancestors actually talking about all day?
Well, there are a few interesting theories about this. One is that language evolved because it was super helpful for, sharing important information.
Sense.
Like you'd want to tell your buddies where the good berries were or if there was, a saber-toothed tiger hanging around. But Harari also lays out this really interesting gossip theory, which argues that language developed to, like, strengthen social bonds and help people navigate the complexities of relationships. Like, think about it. Knowing who to trust, who was a cheat, who was allied with who, that would have been crucial for survival in those early human groups.
So it's like the original social network.
Dude.
And knowing the juicy gossip could make or break your status in the tribe. Speaking of social structures, this leads us right into Harari's concept of imagined realities. He says these are things we collectively believe in, even though they don't physically exist. Like, he uses the example of the company Peugeot.
Yeah, it's a good example.
Help me wrap my head around this. How can a company, which is basically just like a bunch of people, factories, and cars, actually exist?
Right. It's a really mind-bending idea. But he uses Peugeot to illustrate this point really well. The company exists because a whole lot of people believe in the power of the French legal system. A lawyer took some actions, filed the right documents, and because of that shared belief in those structures, millions of people act as if Peugeot is, a real entity. And because they act like it exists, it gains real power and influence in the world.
It's like we're all collectively, agreeing to play this game where pieces of paper and legal jargon can, like, conjure a powerful company into being.
Yeah, it's like a shared story we all tell ourselves.
But that leads to a bigger question. Are these imagined realities just like elaborate lies we tell ourselves?
Not necessarily. Think of them more like shared stories that allow us to cooperate on a massive scale.
Okay.
And that's a big factor in why Homo sapiens became so dominant. Our ability to create and adapt these shared myths, these imagined realities, nations, laws, money, it's what allowed us to coordinate our actions, build complex societies, and ultimately shape the world in a way no other species ever has.
So we've got our big big brains, we've got our shared stories, and we're, basically conquering the planet.
Uh-huh, yeah.
But then comes the agricultural revolution, a huge turning point in human history. Was this the beginning of an era of abundance, or did we actually stumble into a trap?
It's a complex question. Harari, he tackles that head on. Um, on the one hand, agriculture did provide a more reliable food supply, led to population growth, those are positive developments.
You'd think so.
But on the other hand, it also meant like longer, harder work days for most people and increased dependence on a limited number of crops. And then you start to see the emergence of social hierarchies and inequalities.
He even calls agriculture history's biggest fad. I mean, was life really worse after we started farming? Did our health actually, decline?
There's evidence that it might have. Think about it. Instead of a diverse diet of wild plants and animals, early farmers were reliant on just a few, staple crops, which could have led to nutritional deficiencies.
That's interesting.
And living in close proximity to livestock created a breeding ground for infectious diseases.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Plus, if those few crops failed, you were in big trouble. Early farmers were much more vulnerable to famine than their hunter-gatherer ancestors.
Wow, so that, balanced breakfast our ancestors had was way more diverse than anything we see in the cereal aisle today.
Right.
It makes you wonder if that shift to agriculture was, truly progress or just a different set of challenges. But one thing's for sure, larger populations and settled communities meant humans needed new ways to, organize themselves.
Yeah.
And that's where empires and religions come into play, right?
Absolutely. As agricultural societies grew larger and more complex, empires emerged as a way to, maintain order and enable cooperation across vast territories. So they standardized laws, often imposed shared cultures, and sometimes even religions. Think of Hammurabi's Code in ancient Babylon or the sprawling Roman Empire. These are classic examples of how empires brought structure to those growing populations.
But empires weren't all, sunshine and roses, were they?
Right.
Weren't many built on violence and oppression? How
What?
can we view that as a step forward for humanity?
Yeah, you're hitting on a crucial point. While empires definitely had their dark sides, and we can't ignore or downplay that, they also played a role in, fostering large-scale cooperation,
Yeah.
building infrastructure, and spreading ideas and technologies. It's a complicated legacy.
It seems like every step forward in human history comes with its own set of trade-offs. Okay, so empires brought a certain level of order. But what about religion? Did humans really need the gods to keep them in line?
That's a question that anthropologists and historians have been grappling with for centuries, really. Religions, in many ways, they provided meaning. They provided ethical frameworks, a sense of social cohesion.
Yeah.
They offered explanations for, the unknown. They helped people cope with the anxieties of life and death.
Yeah.
Having a world without those comforting narratives, without rituals to bring people together,
Yeah, I can see how religion could be a powerful force for bringing people together. But, on the flip side, weren't religions also a source of conflict and division? I mean, think about the Crusades, religious wars, persecutions throughout history.
You're absolutely right. Religions have, unfortunately, been used to justify some horrific acts throughout history. While religions often promoted peace and charity, they also fueled conflicts and persecutions. It's this complex interplay of positive and negative impacts that makes studying religion so fascinating.
It seems like we humans have this knack for taking something that can be both positive and unifying and using it as a weapon against each other.
Yeah, yeah.
But speaking of, turning points in human history, how did Europe go from a relative backwater to a global powerhouse during the scientific revolution?
That's a fascinating story and one that Harari really delves into in detail. A few key factors contributed to this dramatic shift. The scientific revolution was fueled by a willingness to admit ignorance, a reliance on observation and mathematics to understand the world, and above all, a fervent belief in the idea of progress. It was a time of incredible intellectual ferment and discovery.
But here's where Harari throws in another twist. He argues that science wasn't this purely intellectual pursuit happening in ivory towers. It was actually, deeply tied to the ambitions of empires.
That's right. Science and empires were really entwined in this mutually beneficial relationship. Empires provided funding and motivation for scientific exploration, while science supplied the knowledge and tools that empires needed for exploration, conquest, and control. It was the partnership that really reshaped the world.
It's like those voyages of Captain James Cook. Were those scientific expeditions or imperial expansions? I'm starting to see how blurred those lines really were.
Exactly. Yeah. Cook's voyages, driven by both scientific curiosity and imperial ambition, led to the mapping of new lands, the discovery of new species, and ultimately paved the way for British colonization of Australia and Oceania. It's a perfect example of how science and empire were often two sides of the same coin.
Okay, so we've gone from the cognitive revolution to the rise and fall of empires, and now we're seeing how science and empire are intertwined. But where do we go from here? What does Harari say about the future of Homo sapiens?
Well, buckle up, because Harari suggests that Homo sapiens is on the verge of something truly unprecedented. He points to the incredible potential of genetic engineering, artificial intelligence, and even the revival of extinct species.
Wait, hold on. Like, imagine a world with woolly mammoths roaming the earth again.
Yeah,
That's straight out of, like, a sci-fi movie or
I
something.
think it is.
But he takes it even further, right? He asks this provocative question. Is intelligent design becoming the basic principle of life? What does that even mean?
It means that humans are becoming more and more like the architects of life on Earth, blurring the lines between natural selection and, well, intelligent design. We're manipulating genes, creating new organisms, and potentially even designing new forms of intelligence. It raises the question, are we becoming gods, or are we creating our own successors?
Wow, that is a deep question. And it sounds like we're just getting started.
We've only just scratched the surface. There's
Yeah.
so much more to explore.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've barely scratched the surface of the future that Harari lays out in *Sapiens*. And trust me, it gets even more mind-blowing.
Right.
Like, he dives into this potential future where Homo sapiens might be replaced by beings with, enhanced abilities, even entirely new forms of consciousness. So it's like,
Yeah.
what even is human at that point?
Well, okay. Slow down for a second. I need to process this. We were just talking about bringing back mammoths, and now we're jumping to superhumans replacing us entirely. Let's unpack this idea of intelligent design a little bit more. I get that humans have been selectively breeding plants and animals for, like, thousands of years.
Right.
But that seems like a world away from, like, designing a superhuman.
You're right. There's a huge difference in, scale and complexity. But what's fascinating is the speed at which our capabilities are changing. For billions of years, life evolved through natural selection. Then with the agricultural revolution, humans started tinkering with that process, guiding it in certain directions. But now, with genetic engineering and other, cutting-edge technologies, we're taking intelligent design to a whole new level. We're not just selecting traits anymore, we're creating them.
It's like that fluorescent green rabbit Harari mentions in the book. Scientists, like, literally inserted a jellyfish gene into a rabbit embryo to make it glow in the dark. I
Yeah.
mean, come on, that's not something that would happen naturally.
Exactly. And that's just a tiny taste of what might be possible.
Yeah.
Scientists are exploring gene editing techniques that could potentially eradicate hereditary diseases,
Wow.
enhance cognitive abilities, and even extend lifespans.
That's, like, crazy.
It's mind-boggling to consider the possibilities, both, positive and potentially terrifying.
It does feel a bit like science fiction is becoming reality. So what does this actually mean for the future of our species? Are we talking about a world where, like, designer babies become the norm, like picking and choosing eye color and intelligence levels from a catalog?
That's definitely a possibility, and it raises a whole host of, ethical and philosophical questions.
Yeah.
If we have the power to manipulate the human genome in that way, who gets to decide which traits are desirable and which aren't? What happens to the idea of, human equality if we start engineering superhumans? It's like
Yeah.
opening Pandora's box, and we need to be incredibly careful about what might fly out.
Okay, you've officially blown my mind. It's both exciting and a little unsettling to think about. But let's shift gears for a moment. Harari also talks about the possibility of bringing back extinct species, like those mammoths we were talking about. That's kind of cool, right? Like a real-life Jurassic Park, but with mammoths instead of dinosaurs.
Yes. It's an incredibly fascinating idea, and it really highlights the sheer power of biotechnology. If we can bring back the mammoth, what other extinct creatures could we resurrect? Could we even, recreate Neanderthal?
Now, that would be an episode of the deep dive I would love to hear. Imagine having a Neanderthal on the show to give their take on Sapiens. Okay, back to the big picture for a second. Harari seems to suggest that humanity is reaching a critical juncture. What does he see as the biggest challenges and opportunities facing Homo sapiens in this new era?
Well, he argues that the choices we make in the coming decades will have, enormous consequences for the future of our species and the entire planet. climate change, artificial intelligence, bioengineering.
Mm.
These are all incredibly powerful forces that could, reshape our world in dramatic ways. We're at a point where we desperately need to consider the ethical and societal implications of our technological advancements. Otherwise, those advancements might just end up being our downfall.
He paints a pretty sobering picture of the potential downsides, but I also get the sense of, optimism from his writing. Like he believes we have the capacity to solve these problems if we can just get our act together.
That's right. Harari emphasizes the critical importance of human cooperation and global solidarity. He believes that if we can harness our collective intelligence and creativity, we have the potential to create a truly better future, not just for ourselves, but for all life on Earth. It's a hopeful message, amidst all the daunting challenges we face.
Okay, cooperation is key. I'm getting that message loud and clear. But what about the role of, individuals? Can one person really make a difference in the face of these like massive global challenges? It's easy to feel kind of powerless when you look at the scale of these problems.
This is where I find Harari to be particularly insightful. He believes that individual choices and actions do matter. Even in a world that seems increasingly dominated by these large-scale forces beyond our control. He urges his readers to engage in critical thinking, to constantly question assumptions, and to, take responsibility for their own impact on the world. It's like a call to action disguised as a history book.
He's pushing us to really think about our place in the grand scheme of things, to wrestle with these big questions and not shy away from the tough stuff. It's a little intimidating, to be honest.
It is, and that's exactly what makes Sapiens such a compelling read. It challenges us to confront uncomfortable truths, to expand our understanding of human history, and to think critically about the future we're creating, both individually and, collectively. It's a book that stays with you long after you finish reading it.
We've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive intelligent design, the potential for like superhumans, the revival of extinct species. It's honestly a little overwhelming to like try and wrap my head around all these possibilities. We've only just touched on the implications.
It is a lot to digest, for sure, and it all leads back to this fundamental question. What does it even mean to be human in an age of such rapid technological advancement? Are we still essentially the same creatures who painted those cave murals tens of thousands of years ago? Or are we on the verge of becoming something entirely different?
That's a question that each of us needs to grapple with, I think. There's no easy answer, but the journey of exploring these ideas is fascinating in itself.
I wholeheartedly agree. There's
Sure.
there's immense value in simply asking these questions and being open to the possibilities, however strange or unsettling they may seem.
That's what the deep dive is all about, right?
Yeah.
Exploring these like complex ideas and trying to understand them together. But before we wrap things up, there's one more concept that Harari introduces that we haven't touched on yet, and it's a big one. He argues that humans are becoming increasingly reliant on algorithms, these like complex sets of instructions that are shaping our choices and even our thoughts.
Yes. He calls this the rise of dataism, this idea that uh, data is becoming the supreme value, that algorithms are making more and more decisions for us, and that we're, handing over more and more of our autonomy to these digital systems every day.
Yeah.
It's both fascinating and, I have to admit, a little unnerving.
It is a bit creepy when you think about it. I mean, how much do we rely on algorithms every single day? From the news we read to the products we buy to like the people we connect with online. It's like we're living in a world that's increasingly, controlled by code.
That's the concern. And Harari doesn't, sugarcoat the potential dangers. He warns that if we're not careful, we could end up as slaves to these algorithms, giving up our free will and becoming mere cogs in this vast data processing machine. It's a pretty dystopian vision of the future, but it's one we need to consider seriously.
Whoa, okay, that took a dark turn. So is there any way to harness the power of algorithms for good? Or are we like destined to become slaves to the algorithm overlords?
Harari believes there is a way forward. He argues that we need to develop a much deeper understanding of how algorithms work, to make sure they're being used ethically and responsibly, and to ensure that humans retain control over these incredibly powerful technologies. It's not about, rejecting technology altogether, but about using it wisely and thoughtfully.
So it's about like finding the right balance, harnessing the potential while, protecting our human values and freedom. Sounds like a tightrope walk to me.
It is a delicate balance, absolutely, but it's a conversation we need to have. And the sooner the better. These technologies aren't going away, so we need to figure out how to live with them, and more importantly, how to ensure they serve humanity rather than the other way around.
Yeah, it's a lot to think about. It feels like we're standing at this crossroads,
Yeah.
with all this incredible power at our fingertips, but maybe not the wisdom to use it responsibly.
It's true.
Harari's book really makes you stop and think about like the responsibility that comes with all these technological advancements.
It does, doesn't it?
Right.
He brings up this question of like, are we on the path to becoming gods? Or are we just paving the way for something else to take our place? It's a pretty intense thought, but it gets to the heart of what we've been talking about.
Hmm.
Are we truly in control and shaping the future of life on Earth? Or are we just setting the stage for something else to take over?
I think one of the most powerful things about Sapiens is that it doesn't try to like spoon feed you the answers. It just throws these big like existential questions at you and then steps back and lets you wrestle with them on your own.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's not a book that tells you what to think, but more about how to think.
Right.
It encourages you to question everything you thought you knew, to really examine the evidence and to come to your own conclusions
Yeah.
about human history and our place in this vast universe.
It's almost like he's handing us this like toolkit for understanding the past
Yeah.
and then using those tools to navigate the future.
That's a great way to put it. He gives us the historical context, the scientific insights, the philosophical framework
Hmm.
to help us make sense of this complex world we live in and the even more complex world that's taking shape right in front of us.
So what does all this mean for the listener who's been with us on this deep dive? Why should they care about these big mind-bending ideas? How does Sapiens connect to their everyday life?
Well, I think understanding history is crucial for, making informed decisions in the present. When we look at the long arc of human development, we get a better grasp of the forces that have shaped the world we live in, the challenges we face, and the potential opportunities that are out there.
So it's not just about memorizing a bunch of historical facts and dates, right?
Yeah.
It's about gaining insights that can actually help us like navigate the present and shape the future we want to see.
Exactly. And I think Sapiens does a brilliant job of, connecting those dots between the past, the present, and the future. It shows how seemingly distant events and ideas have rippled through time to shape the world we live in today. And it challenges us to think critically about the choices we make and the legacy we leave behind for future generations.
It's a powerful reminder that we're not just passive bystanders
Right.
watching history unfold.
Right.
We're all active participants in shaping the story of humanity.
Exactly. And I think that's a very empowering message. It means we have the ability to influence the future, to make a real difference in the world, and to leave a positive mark on the story of humankind.
After this deep dive into Sapiens together, what's the one thing you hope our listener will take away from it?
Hmm. I hope they come away with a renewed sense of curiosity about the world,
Yeah.
a deeper appreciation for the long and winding story of human history, and a willingness to, engage in these thoughtful conversations about the big ideas that are shaping our future.
That's a perfect takeaway. And maybe, just maybe, they'll be inspired to pick up a copy of Sapiens themselves, and embark on their own deep dive into the history of humankind.
I can't think of a better way to spend some time, honestly.
Well, on that note, we'll wrap up our deep dive into Yuval Noah Harari's Sapiens. It's been a wild ride through the past, present, and future of our species. Thanks for coming along with us on this journey.
It's been a pleasure.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep learning. The world is full of fascinating ideas waiting to be discovered. And remember, the future isn't something that just happens to us, it's something we create together.